The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Hargrove mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Eliza wiped the sweat from her brow as she polished the hallway table for the third time that week. At 32 years old, she had been cleaning this massive house for 3 years now. And still, some days, she couldn't believe how one man could own so much space and fill it with so many things that needed dusting. She pushed her cleaning cart down the hall, heading toward the main living room. The wheels squeaked slightly, and she made a mental note to oil them later. Any noise in this house felt like an intrusion. Her employer, Victor Hargrove, rarely spoke to her directly, but when he did, it was usually to complain about something disturbing his peace. Victor was what people politely called self-made. Less polite people called him ruthless. He had built his tech company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, crushing competitors along the way. Now at 45, he lived alone in this 20-room mansion on the outskirts of the city, where his nearest neighbor was half a mile away. "Remember to do the living room first, Mrs. Powell," the house manager said as she passed Eliza in the hall. Mr. Hargrove mentioned there was a spill during his meeting yesterday. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza replied, changing direction. The living room was more like a small ballroom. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and furniture that probably cost more than what Eliza made in a year. But what caught her eye was the new addition, a gleaming black grand piano sitting by the bay windows catching the morning light on its polished surface. Eliza stopped pushing her cart. The piano hadn't been there yesterday. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mrs. Powell had followed her into the room. "Delivered last night. Apparently it's for the big party this weekend. Mr. Hargrove says it completes the room." "Does he play?" Eliza asked, knowing the answer already. Mrs. Powell laughed softly. "Mr. Hargrove doesn't have time for hobbies. It's for show, like half the things in this house." After Mrs. Powell left, Eliza approached the piano carefully, almost as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She ran a cleaning cloth over its surface, removing invisible dust, tracing the curve of its lid. The brand name was embedded in gold letters, Steinway & Sons. Even Eliza, who knew nothing about piano brands, recognized this one. "Don't touch the keys," came a sharp voice from the doorway. Eliza jumped back, nearly knocking over a vase. Victor Hargrove stood watching her, his tall frame filling the doorway. He wore a gray suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her salary. "I wasn't going to, sir," she said, lowering her eyes. "Just cleaning the surface." He walked into the room, looking at the piano rather than at her. "It's an investment piece. The salesman said it's one of the finest in the world." "It's beautiful," Eliza said, immediately regretting speaking at all. In 3 years, they had barely exchanged more than necessary words. Victor glanced at her, seeming surprised she had an opinion. "Yes, well, the party on Saturday is important. Business associates, potential investors. Everything needs to be perfect. I'll make sure it's spotless. Sir?" He nodded absently and left the room without another word, already on his phone, barking instructions to someone about market shares and quarterly reports. Eliza returned to her cleaning, but her eyes kept drifting back to the piano. As a child, she had dreamed of learning to play, but her family could barely afford rent, let alone music lessons. Her father had brought home an old keyboard once, found at a yard sale, but it had broken after a few months, and that had been the end of that dream. By noon, Eliza had finished the downstairs rooms and moved upstairs to clean the guest bedrooms. The mansion had 8 bedrooms, though as far as she knew, Victor never had overnight guests. Still, each room was maintained as if royalty might arrive at any moment. While changing sheets in the blue room, Eliza heard the faint sound of the doorbell, followed by voices downstairs. Through the window, she saw a delivery truck in the circular driveway. "More party preparations, probably. Eliza," Mrs. Powell's voice called from the bottom of the grand staircase. "Can you come help with these flower deliveries, please?" For the next hour, Eliza helped arrange dozens of flower arrangements throughout the first floor. White roses, orchids, and lilies filled the house with their scent. The florist, a friendly woman named Ling, chatted with Eliza as they worked. "Some party he must be having," Ling said, trimming a stem. "Haven't seen an order this big since that movie star got married here last summer." "It's for business," Eliza explained, holding a vase steady. "Important people coming?" "Always business with that one, isn't it? Never seen him smile in the 5 years I've been delivering here." Ling lowered her voice. "What's he like to work for?" Eliza hesitated. He's distant, but the pay is good, and Mrs. Powell is nice. Must be lonely in this big place, Ling mused. Looking around at the vast room, Eliza had never thought about whether Victor was lonely. He didn't seem like someone who needed people, just achievements and possessions. After Ling left, Eliza returned to the living room to vacuum. The piano drew her eyes again. She finished vacuuming the room and then stood looking at the instrument for a long moment. No one was around. Mrs. Powell was in the kitchen discussing the catering menu with the chef, and Victor had left for a meeting downtown. Slowly, Eliza approached the piano. She just wanted to look more closely, she told herself. The lid was closed over the keys and she carefully, very carefully lifted it. The black and white keys gleamed up at her, perfect and untouched. Her hand hovered over them, not quite daring to press down. What do you think you're doing? Eliza slammed the lid closed and spun around. Victor stood in the doorway again, his briefcase in hand. He must have forgotten something and returned. I'm sorry, sir, I specifically said not to touch it, he said coldly. I didn't press any keys, she said quickly. I was just looking, his eyes narrowed. Do you even know what that is? It's a Steinway Model D concert grand piano worth more than you'll make in a decade. It's not a toy for the help to play with. The words stung more than they should have. Eliza had been called the help before, but something about the way he said it made her feel particularly small. I understand, sir. It won't happen again. He checked his watch impatiently. See that it doesn't. And make sure the silver is properly polished for Saturday. The last time we used it, there were water spots. After he left again, Eliza stood rooted to the spot, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She had never been fired from a job, and she couldn't afford to lose this one. Her mother's medical bills were still coming in, and her younger brother was starting community college in the fall. This job, with its decent pay and flexible hours, had been a lifesaver. For the rest of the day, Eliza worked harder than usual, determined to prove her worth. She polished every piece of silver until she could see her reflection in it. She changed all the hand towels in the guest bathrooms. She even got on her hands and knees to scrub a stubborn stain on the kitchen floor that the regular mop couldn't handle. By evening, her back ached, and her hands were raw from cleaning solutions. As she gathered her things to leave, Mrs. Powell stopped her at the door. Mr. Hargrove mentioned you were interested in the piano, she said. Eliza's heart sank. I wasn't trying to play it, I swear. I just looked at it. Mrs. Powell's face softened. It's all right, dear. I just wanted to tell you that it'll be tuned tomorrow morning. The tuner comes at 10, so you'll need to clean the living room early. Of course, I'll do it first thing. Mrs. Powell hesitated, then added, And Eliza, Mr. Hargrove can be harsh sometimes, but he's under a lot of pressure with this party. The people coming, well, let's just say there's a lot riding on it. Eliza nodded, though she didn't understand why that should excuse his behavior. Still, a job was a job. The next morning, Eliza arrived early to clean the living room before the piano tuner came. As she dusted the bookshelves filled with books that looked unread, she wondered what kind of music would be played on that beautiful piano. Perhaps Victor had hired a pianist for the party. The thought of music filling this cold house was somehow comforting. The piano tuner arrived precisely at 10, a gentle old man with thick glasses and careful hands. Eliza finished cleaning the other downstairs rooms while he worked, occasionally hearing single notes ring out as he adjusted something inside the piano. All done, he announced 2 hours later, closing the lid. A magnificent instrument. Shame it's just for show. How do you know? Eliza asked. The old man smiled. The keys have never been played. Not a single smudge or sign of use. And Mr. Hargrove doesn't strike me as a pianist. As he packed his tools, he added, Music isn't meant to be looked at. It's meant to be heard, to be felt. He tapped his chest. In here. After he left, Eliza stood alone with the piano again. This time she kept her distance, just looking at it from across the room. Saturday was only 2 days away, and soon the house would be full of people. Important people, as Victor kept reminding everyone. And then what would happen to the piano? Would it sit there forever, unplayed and unloved like so many other beautiful things in this house? Eliza shook her head and returned to her cleaning cart. It wasn't her concern. The piano wasn't hers, and neither was this house. She was just passing through like the flowers that would wilt and be replaced next week, like the seasons that changed outside the windows she kept spotless. But as she worked, She couldn't help humming softly to herself, imagining for a moment what it would be like to sit at that bench and create something beautiful in this empty space. The day of the party arrived with a flurry of activity. Eliza got to the mansion at 7 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual. The caterers would arrive at noon, and everything needed to be perfect before then. Mrs. Powell met her at the service entrance, looking more stressed than Eliza had ever seen her. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, pulling Eliza inside. "We've got a situation. What's wrong?" Eliza asked, hanging up her coat. "One of the cleaning crew called in sick, and another quit yesterday, apparently got a better offer at some hotel downtown." Mrs. Powell ran a hand through her usually neat hair. "It's just you, me, and Louise for the whole house, and Mr. Hargrove is already on edge." As if summoned by his name, Victor's voice echoed down the hallway. "Mrs. Powell, where are those place cards I approved yesterday?" "Coming, sir," Mrs. Powell called back. She turned to Eliza with pleading eyes. "Can you handle the downstairs bathrooms and living areas? Louise will do upstairs in the kitchen." "Of course," Eliza said. She grabbed her card and got to work. The morning passed in a blur of cleaning sprays, vacuum noise, and polishing cloths. By 11, Eliza's back was aching, but the downstairs sparkled. Every surface gleamed, every floor shone, and not a speck of dust could be found on any of the expensive furniture. The piano especially had received her careful attention, though she had been extremely careful not to touch the keys again. At 11:30, as Eliza was emptying her last trash can, Victor walked through the living room talking on his phone. He wore a dark blue suit that looked custom-made, his shoes reflecting the chandelier light with each step. He glanced around the room with critical eyes, nodding slightly when he saw how clean everything was. It wasn't exactly a thank you, but it was as close as Eliza had ever gotten from him. "Yes, of course I understand the implications," he said into his phone as he paced. "But the Chen Group needs to see that we're serious about this merger. Tonight is about showing strength, not desperation." Eliza tried to make herself invisible as she finished her work, but Victor suddenly looked directly at her. "Hold on a moment," he said to whoever was on the phone. He covered the mouthpiece and addressed Eliza. "The flower arrangement on the piano is crooked. Fix it." "Yes, sir," she said, hurrying to adjust the massive display of white roses and orchids that sat atop the grand piano. Victor resumed his phone conversation, walking toward the window. "As I was saying, the Chen family is old money. They value tradition, culture. That's why I've gone to such lengths with tonight's setup." As Eliza carefully shifted the flower arrangement, she couldn't help overhearing more of his conversation. "Yes, the piano was expensive, but it makes the right statement. These people appreciate fine things." He laughed, a sound Eliza had rarely heard from him. "No, I don't play. It's for the ambiance. Nobody actually plays these things anymore." Something about his dismissive tone made Eliza's hands tighten on the vase. Music had been her mother's joy, the one beautiful thing they had shared in their small apartment growing up. Even when they couldn't afford much else, her mother would sing, filling their home with melodies that made their struggles seem temporarily distant. The caterers arrived exactly at noon, bringing with them a controlled chaos of food preparation. The kitchen became off-limits to the cleaning staff as chefs in white coats took over, producing delicious smells that reminded Eliza she hadn't eaten since early morning. Mrs. Powell found her in the hallway. "You've done wonderful work, Eliza. Just one more thing. Mr. Hargrove wants you and Louise to help serve tonight." "Serve? But I'm not trained as waitstaff." "None of the regular servers could make it on such short notice," Mrs. Powell explained apologetically. "It's just passing trays, refilling glasses. Simple. And," she lowered her voice, "he's offering double pay." Eliza thought of her brother's textbook bill that had arrived yesterday. "Okay, what time should we be back?" 5 o'clock. Guests arrive at 6:30. There's a service uniform in the laundry room that should fit you. Black pants, white shirt. At home, Eliza managed to nap for an hour before getting ready. She lived in a small apartment about 40 minutes from the Hargrove mansion by bus. It wasn't much, just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living space barely big enough for a couch and TV. But it was clean and hers. Photos of her mother, who had passed away last year, sat on a small shelf beside her nursing school diploma, a dream cut short when family needs had become more pressing. Eliza showered and pulled her dark hair back into a neat bun. She didn't own much makeup, but she applied a little powder and lip gloss, not wanting to look completely washed out under the bright lights of the mansion. The black pants she already had, but she carefully ironed her best white blouse before leaving. Back at the mansion by 5, Eliza changed into the service uniform Mrs. Powell had left for her. Luis was already there, looking uncomfortable in his serving clothes. "Ever done this before?" he asked her as they received instructions from the catering manager. "No, you?" "Once at my cousin's wedding. It was a disaster. I spilled red wine on the bride's mother." Eliza laughed. "Let's try to avoid that tonight." For the next hour, they practiced carrying trays of empty glasses, learning the proper way to approach guests and how to anticipate their needs without being intrusive. The catering manager, a brisk woman named Hannah, drilled them on the menu so they could answer questions about ingredients and preparation methods. "Remember," Hannah said, "you are part of the background. Efficient, helpful, but never the center of attention." By 6:15, everything was ready. The mansion looked like something out of a magazine. Candles flickered on every surface. Crystal glasses sparkled in the soft light, and flowers perfumed the air. The grand piano sat majestically by the windows, its lid raised now, though no pianist had appeared. Victor emerged from his office in a tuxedo, inspecting every detail with sharp eyes. When he saw Eliza and Luis in their serving uniforms, he barely seemed to recognize them, giving only a curt nod before moving on to speak with the catering manager. The doorbell rang at 6:30 exactly, and the first guests arrived, an older couple introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Chen. Victor greeted them with unusual warmth, bowing slightly as he took Mrs. Chen's hand. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice softer than Eliza had ever heard it. "I'm honored you could come." More guests arrived in quick succession, business people in expensive clothes, speaking of stocks and market trends, mergers and acquisitions. Eliza moved among them with a tray of champagne flutes, trying to be invisible as instructed. Most guests took glasses without even looking at her, continuing their conversations as if she were indeed just part of the background. Eliza overheard snippets as she moved around the room. "Victor's done well for himself. Have you seen the quarterly reports? Impressive growth. The Chen family rarely invests outside their usual circles. He must have something special planned." An hour into the party, Eliza was refilling her tray at the drink station when she noticed a group gathering near the piano. Victor stood with them, champagne in hand, laughing at something Mr. Chen had said. The older man was running his hand appreciatively along the piano's glossy surface. "A magnificent instrument," Mr. Chen said loud enough for Eliza to hear. "Steinway Model D, if I'm not mistaken." "Do you play, Victor?" A small silence fell over the group. Victor's smile flickered for just a moment. "I appreciate fine music, but unfortunately business leaves little time for hobbies." "Ah, what a shame," Mrs. Chen said. She was a tiny woman with elegant white hair and piercing eyes. "In our family, music is essential to a full life. Our daughter studied at Juilliard before joining the family business." "How wonderful," Victor said, his smile fixed in place. "Who plays this beautiful instrument, then?" asked another guest, a tall woman in a red dress. Victor hesitated, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an answer. And then, to Eliza's horror, his gaze landed on her. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "music is a shared pleasure in this house. Even my staff has remarkable talents." Eliza froze, her tray of empty glasses clutched to her chest. Victor was walking toward her now, that same smile still fixed on his face. "Eliza here has quite a gift for the piano," he said, reaching her side and gently but firmly taking the tray from her hands. "She's too modest to mention it, but I insist she share her talent with us tonight." The room turned to look at her. 20 pairs of eyes, all curious, all waiting. Eliza felt her face grow hot. "Sir?" she whispered urgently. Don't be shy," Victor said, his voice warm, but his eyes cold with warning. He placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the piano. "Just a short piece to accompany our lovely evening." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She had never played a piano in her life, had never even touched piano keys except for those few moments on the old keyboard her father had brought home when she was 12. And now Victor expected her to perform for his important guests? She realized with sudden clarity what was happening. He was punishing her for looking at the piano that day, for daring to touch what wasn't hers. He knew she couldn't play. He was deliberately humiliating her in front of everyone. I'm sure we'd all love to hear something, Mrs. Chen said kindly, mistaking Eliza's terror for stage fright. There was no escape. Victor's hand on her shoulder steered her relentlessly toward the piano bench. The guests parted to make way, some smiling encouragingly, others simply curious. Luis, across the room with his own tray, watched with wide, sympathetic eyes. Perhaps a classical piece, Victor suggested, his voice dripping with false encouragement. Chopin, maybe? Something to show off this magnificent instrument. Eliza found herself seated at the piano bench, staring at the black and white keys that stretched before her like a road to nowhere. Her hands trembled. The room waited in expectant silence. This job meant everything to her. Her rent, her brother's education, her mother's medical bills, all depended on her paycheck from this house. And now, in one cruel moment, Victor was going to take it all away, using her as entertainment for his guests. Eliza sat frozen at the piano bench, staring at the keys as if they might suddenly come to life and play themselves. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. She could feel Victor standing just behind her, probably enjoying her discomfort. The guests waited, champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, conversation suspended. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman with the piercing eyes, smiled encouragingly at her. "Take your time, dear," she said gently. "We all get nervous." Eliza swallowed hard. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She had to do something, anything. Maybe she could press a few random notes and then apologize, claim stage fright, and retreat to the kitchen. But that would only make Victor's humiliation of her complete. She'd be the cleaning lady who pretended to have talent she didn't possess. Just as she was about to give up and face her embarrassment, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced, clear and sudden, of her mother sitting beside her at that old keyboard from the yard sale. Her mother's hands guiding hers, showing her the basic scales. Up and down, up and down. "Music is mathematics with soul," her mother had said. "Find the pattern, then add your heart." Eliza had forgotten those lessons. They had lasted only a few weeks before the keyboard broke. But her mother had taught her the C major scale, simple chords, and the beginning of a song, a lullaby her grandmother had sung in the old country. Without really deciding to, Eliza placed her fingers on the keys and began to play that simple lullaby. The notes were hesitant at first, childlike in their simplicity. The rich tone of the Steinway transformed even these basic notes into something beautiful. The melody was slow and sweet, a song about stars and dreams and a mother's love. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't even particularly skilled. But it was real, and it came from a genuine place of memory and love. Eliza kept her eyes on her fingers, too afraid to look up and see the reactions of the wealthy guests to her simple tune. When she finished the short piece, there was another moment of silence. Then, to her surprise, applause broke out. Polite, perhaps a bit relieved, but genuine. "How lovely," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes twinkling, so pure and heartfelt. Eliza finally dared to look up. Most of the guests were smiling, apparently charmed by the unexpected simplicity of her performance. Victor, however, looked confused, his plan for public humiliation having not gone quite as expected. He hadn't anticipated that she could play anything at all. "Thank you," Eliza murmured, starting to rise from the bench. "What was that piece?" asked a young man near the front. "I don't recognize it. It's just an old lullaby my mother taught me," Eliza explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not really a pianist." "Self-taught, then?" asked Mr. Chen, moving closer to the piano. "Remarkable. There's something pure about music that comes from the heart rather than just technical training." Victor stepped forward, clearly eager to regain control of the situation. Well, that was a charming interlude. "Now, if we could continue our discussion about the merger—" "Wait," Mrs. Chen interrupted, something sparking in her eyes. "You have such a magnificent instrument here. It would be a shame not to hear it properly played." She turned to the crowd. "Our daughter May studied at Juilliard, but I also had the privilege of attending the Moscow Conservatory in my youth." To everyone's surprise, the tiny, elegant woman moved toward the piano. "May I?" she asked Eliza. "Of course," Eliza said, quickly standing and moving aside. Mrs. Chen sat at the bench, adjusting it slightly for her height. Then, without any sheet music, her fingers began to dance across the keys. The room filled with the complex, passionate notes of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. Her small hands somehow spanned incredible distances on the keyboard. creating thunderous bass notes and delicate high melodies simultaneously. Eliza watched in awe as the elderly woman transformed before their eyes, her back straightening, her face becoming animated with the emotion of the music. The guests stood transfixed. Even Victor seemed genuinely impressed, his earlier annoyance temporarily forgotten. When Mrs. Chen finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. She smiled, inclining her head graciously, then turned to Eliza with unexpected warmth. "Music connects us across all boundaries," she said. "Your lullaby touched me because it came from your heart. Now," she patted the bench beside her, "come sit. I will show you something." Eliza hesitated, glancing at Victor, whose face had become unreadable. "Go ahead," he said stiffly, clearly unable to object without appearing rude to his important guest. Eliza sat beside Mrs. Chen, who took her right hand and positioned it on the keys. "Like this," the older woman said, demonstrating a simple pattern. "Now you try." Eliza copied the movement, producing a pleasant sequence of notes. "Good. Now add this with your left hand." Mrs. Chen demonstrated again. To Eliza's surprise, when she put both patterns together, she was playing the basic foundation of a well-known classical piece. Mrs. Chen added flourishes with her own hands at the higher end of the keyboard, making Eliza's simple playing sound like part of something magnificent. The guests watched with delighted surprise as the cleaning lady and the wealthy investor's wife played a spontaneous duet on the grand piano. When they finished, everyone applauded again, and Eliza felt a rush of joy unlike anything she'd experienced in years. "You have a natural ear," Mrs. Chen told her quietly. "You feel the music. That cannot be taught." The moment was broken when Victor stepped forward again. "A wonderful musical interlude," he said, his businessman smile back in place. "Now if we could move to the dining room, dinner is served." As the guests began to move toward the dining room, Mrs. Chen lingered at the piano with Eliza. "How long have you been playing?" she asked. "I'm not really a pianist," Eliza admitted. "My mother taught me a little when I was young, but we couldn't afford lessons or even a piano." Mrs. Chen studied her face. "Yet you remembered after all these years. The music must live in you." She hesitated, then asked, "What do you do here exactly?" Eliza straightened her serving uniform. "I clean the house." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Chen's eyes. She glanced toward Victor, who was ushering guests into the dining room, then back to Eliza. "I see," she said quietly. "He did not expect you to be able to play at all, did he?" Eliza looked down. "No," Mrs. Chen's face hardened slightly. "Men like him believe talent only exists among those who can afford to develop it." She took a small card from a hidden pocket in her dress and pressed it into Eliza's hand. "Call this number tomorrow. Ask for Lee. Tell him Grace Chen sent you." Before Eliza could ask what this meant, Victor appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Chen, your husband is asking for you." "Of course," she replied smoothly, her face transforming back into the pleasant social mask of earlier. She patted Eliza's hand once more before walking toward Victor. As she passed him, she said something too quiet for Eliza to hear. Victor's expression shifted from polite attentiveness to surprise, then calculation. Eliza tucked the card into her pocket and hurried to the kitchen to help serve dinner. For the next 2 hours, she moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room, bringing plates and removing them, refilling wine glasses, and trying to remain invisible as instructed. But she noticed that several guests, especially the Chens, watched her with new interest. The conversation at dinner revolved around business matters, the potential merger between Victor's tech company and the Chen family's international holdings. Numbers were mentioned that made Eliza's head spin. Millions, even billions of dollars discussed as casually as she might talk about bus fare. "The cultural fit is what concerns me," Mr. Chen was saying as Eliza cleared his dessert plate. "Financial projections are promising, but corporate culture is the foundation of lasting success. I assure you, my company values align perfectly with yours," Victor replied. "We prioritize innovation, excellence, and recognizing talent wherever we find it." Mrs. Chen's eyes flickered briefly to Eliza at this last statement, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. After dinner, the guests returned to the living room for coffee and more conversation. As the evening wound down, Eliza found herself near the piano again, polishing fingerprints from its shiny surface. "You play beautifully," said a voice behind her. She turned to find a young woman she hadn't noticed before, perhaps in her early 30s with the same piercing eyes as Mrs. Chen. "Oh, I don't really. My mother told me," the woman said. "I'm Mei Chen. That was my mother who played the Rachmaninoff." "Your mother is amazing," Eliza said honestly. "I've never heard anything like it in person before." Mei smiled. "She rarely plays in public these days. You inspired her, I think." She nodded toward the piano. "Do you want to learn properly?" The question caught Eliza off guard. I couldn't afford lessons." "That's not what I asked," Mei said gently. Before Eliza could respond, Victor approached them, his face composed but his eyes watchful. "Ah, Ms. Chen, I see you've met Eliza." His tone was cordial, but Eliza could sense tension beneath it. "I hope the evening has been enjoyable for you." "Enlightening," Mei replied. "Your home is beautiful and the company unexpected." Her gaze lingered on Eliza. "Yes. Well," Victor said. "Full of surprises, I suppose." He turned to Eliza. "I believe Mrs. Powell needs help in the kitchen." It was a clear dismissal. Eliza nodded and turned to go, but Mei reached out and lightly touched her arm. "Don't forget what my mother told you," she said. Eliza felt the card in her pocket like a secret promise as she walked back to the kitchen. Whatever Mrs. Chen's message meant, it felt like something important was beginning. Something completely unexpected when she had woken up that morning. The party ended just after midnight. Guests slowly departed in expensive cars, the Chens being among the last to leave. Eliza watched from the kitchen window as Mrs. Chen said something to Victor at the door, her small hand resting briefly on his arm. Whatever she said made Victor glance back toward the house with a thoughtful expression. "Quite a night," Luis said as he loaded the last of the dirty glasses into the dishwasher. "Never thought I'd see the cleaning staff providing the entertainment." "I didn't exactly volunteer," Eliza replied, wiping down the countertops. "Still, you were good. Where'd you learn to play?" "I didn't really. Just remembered a little bit my mother taught me." Luis shook his head. "Well, you could have fooled me. And that old lady, man, she could really play." Mrs. Powell entered the kitchen looking exhausted but satisfied. "Everything went perfectly. Mr. Hargrove is very pleased with how the evening turned out." She smiled at Eliza. "Especially that unexpected musical performance." "I had no idea you played the piano, Eliza." "I don't," Eliza said. "Not really." Mrs. Powell raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Well, whatever it was, the Chens were impressed, and they're the ones Mr. Hargrove needed to impress. "So good job, both of you. Take tomorrow off. Paid day. Mr. Hargrove's orders." After helping with the last of the cleanup, Eliza changed back into her regular clothes and prepared to leave. It was nearly 1 in the morning, and the last bus would have already gone. She'd have to call a rideshare service, which would eat into the extra money she'd earned tonight, but she had little choice. As she was gathering her things, Victor appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd removed his tie and jacket but still looked perfectly put together despite the late hour. Everyone else had already left, and Eliza felt suddenly nervous being alone with him after the evening's events. "Sir," she acknowledged, keeping her eyes down. "The Chens were quite taken with you," he said, his voice neutral. "They were very kind," Eliza replied carefully. Victor was silent for a moment, studying her. "Mrs. Chen is on the board of the City Symphony." "Did you know that?" Eliza shook her head. "She's also a major arts patron and runs a foundation that provides musical education to underprivileged students." He leaned against the doorframe, his posture casual but his gaze intense. "She seemed to think you have potential." Eliza didn't know how to respond to that. She clutched her bag tighter, feeling the shape of Mrs. Chen's card in her pocket. "I didn't intend for tonight to turn out the way it did," Victor continued. There was something different in his tone, not exactly apologetic but less commanding than usual. "I made an assumption about you. It appears I was wrong." Was that as close to an apology as Victor Hargrove ever got? Eliza couldn't be sure. "It's late," he said abruptly. "My driver can take you home." "That's not necessary. It's 1 in the morning and I doubt the buses are still running. Thomas is waiting out front." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Eliza, whatever Mrs. Chen offered you, you should take it." Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The ride home in Victor's sleek black car was surreal. The driver, Thomas, was polite but quiet, asking only for her address before setting off. Eliza sat in the soft leather back seat, staring out at the city lights, trying to make sense of the evening. When she arrived at her apartment building, a stark contrast to the Hargrove mansion with its worn brick exterior and flickering hallway lights, she thanked Thomas and hurried inside. Her tiny apartment felt especially small after spending the day in Victor's sprawling home. But it was clean and it was hers. Too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion, Eliza made a cup of tea and sat at her small kitchen table. She pulled out Mrs. Chen's card. It was elegant but simple, cream-colored with just a name, Lee Wong, and a phone number in gold lettering. No title, no company name, nothing to indicate who this person was or why Eliza should call them. She turned the card over. On the back, in delicate handwriting, Mrs. Chen had written, "Music finds its way." Eliza set her alarm for 9, though she doubted she'd sleep much. Whatever this opportunity was, it felt too important to ignore. Morning came too quickly. After a shower and a quick breakfast, Eliza sat with her phone staring at the number on the card. It was 9:30, a reasonable time to call, she hoped. Taking a deep breath, she dialed. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered. "Lee Wong speaking." "Hello?" Eliza said, her voice shakier than she intended. "My name is Eliza Martinez. Mrs. Chen, Grace Chen, gave me your number last night. She told me to call you." There was a pause. The pianist from Mr. Hargrove's party. Mrs. Chen mentioned you." She was quite impressed. "I'm not really a pianist," Eliza said automatically. A soft chuckle came through the phone. "That's what makes it interesting. Mrs. Chen said you played from memory with no formal training." "Just a little bit my mother taught me when I was young, on an old keyboard that didn't even work properly, and yet years later you remembered. That suggests an aptitude worth exploring." Lee's voice was kind but businesslike. "Mrs. Chen asked me to offer you an opportunity. Are you interested in learning properly?" Eliza's heart raced. "I can't afford lessons." "That's not a concern. The Chen Foundation provides scholarships to promising musicians. It would cover everything: lessons, access to practice facilities, even a small stipend for transportation and materials." "But I'm 32, Eliza protested. "Aren't these scholarships for children or college students?" "The foundation supports musicians of all ages. Mrs. Chen believes talent should be nurtured whenever it's discovered." Lee paused. "This would require commitment, Ms. Martinez. At least 1 hour of practice daily plus weekly lessons. Can you manage that with your current employment?" Eliza thought of her schedule. Her work at Victor's house was usually done by 3 or 4 in the afternoon. "I think so, yes." "Excellent. We'd like to start with an assessment. Are you available this afternoon? 4 o'clock at the Chen Music Center downtown?" After getting the address and ending the call, Eliza sat in stunned silence. Everything was happening so quickly. Just yesterday, she had been cleaning Victor's house as usual. Now she was being offered a music scholarship because she had played a simple lullaby on a piano she wasn't even supposed to touch. At 3:30 that afternoon, Eliza stood outside the Chen Music Center, an impressive glass and stone building in the cultural district downtown. She had dressed in her best clothes, black pants and a blue blouse, but still felt underdressed as she watched people entering and exiting in elegant attire, carrying instrument cases and sheet music. Gathering her courage, she pushed through the revolving doors into a spacious lobby with high ceilings and marble floors. A large sculpture of musical instruments cast in bronze dominated the center of the space. "May I help you?" asked a receptionist at the sleek desk. "I have an appointment with Lee Wong at 4 o'clock. "My name is Eliza Martinez," the receptionist smiled. "Yes, Mr. Wong is expecting you. 5th floor, suite 512. The elevator opened onto a hallway lined with practice rooms. Through the small windows in each door, Eliza could see people of all ages playing various instruments: a young boy at a cello, an elderly man at a violin, a middle-aged woman at a flute. From each room came muted sounds of music, creating a strange, beautiful cacophony in the hallway. Suite 512 was at the end of the corridor. Eliza knocked hesitantly. "Come in," called a voice from inside. The room was large and bright, with windows overlooking the city. In the center stood a grand piano much like Victor's. A man about 60 years old with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes rose from behind a desk to greet her. "Ms. Martinez, welcome. I'm Lee Wong, Director of Educational Programs for the Chen Foundation." They shook hands and Lee gestured for her to sit. "Mrs. Chen has told me about your performance last night," he said. "It's quite unusual for her to take such immediate interest in someone. She's normally very selective." "I really didn't do anything special," Eliza said. "I just played a simple tune my mother taught me, and that's precisely what intrigued her. Authentic musical instinct is rare, Ms. Martinez. Technical skill can be taught, but the ability to connect emotionally through music, that's innate." Lee folded his hands on the desk. "Mrs. Chen believes you have that ability. I'd like to see for myself, if you don't mind." He stood and moved to the piano, inviting her to join him. "Please play whatever you feel comfortable with. The same piece as last night would be fine." Eliza sat at the bench, already feeling more nervous than she had at Victor's party. There, she'd had no choice. Here she was voluntarily putting herself in a position to be judged. She placed her fingers on the keys and began the simple lullaby again. As before, the notes were basic, but she played with genuine feeling, remembering her mother's voice singing along with the melody. When she finished, Lee nodded thoughtfully. "Now try this." He played a short, simple sequence of notes.
Can you repeat that?
Eliza listened carefully, then replicated the pattern perfectly. "Very good. Now this." He played something slightly more complex with both hands. Again, Eliza repeated it after hearing it just once. Lee continued this process, playing progressively more challenging sequences. Eliza matched each one until he finally played something so complex that she could only approximate part of it. "Remarkable," Lee said. "Your ear is exceptional. With proper training, you could—" He was interrupted by a knock at the door. It opened to reveal Mrs. Chen herself, elegant in a simple gray dress. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, entering the room. "I wanted to see how our new student is progressing." Lee stood respectfully. "Mrs. Chen, we were just completing the assessment. Ms. Martinez has extraordinary potential. Her auditory memory is exceptional." Mrs. Chen smiled at Eliza. "I knew it the moment I heard you play that lullaby. There was something genuine in your performance that many trained pianists lack after years of technical study." She sat in a chair near the piano. "Tell me, Eliza, why do you clean houses for a living?" The question caught Eliza off guard. I needed the money. My mother got sick a few years ago, cancer. The medical bills, and then my younger brother started college. Cleaning pays better than retail, and the hours worked with my brother's schedule so I could help him with his son. My nephew." Mrs. Chen nodded. "And before that? What did you dream of doing?" Eliza hesitated. "I was studying nursing, but I had to drop out when my mother got sick." "A caretaker by nature, then," Mrs. Chen observed. "Both noble professions, healing and music. They have more in common than you might think." She turned to Lee. "What do you recommend?" "I'd suggest starting with fundamentals. Theory, proper technique, but moving quickly given her natural aptitude. Professor Lin might be the right teacher. He specializes in adult beginners with unusual talent." "Make the arrangements," Mrs. Chen said. She turned back to Eliza. "That is, if you accept our offer?" Eliza felt overwhelmed. "This is incredibly generous, but I don't understand why you're doing this for me." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. 50 years ago, I was a young woman with musical talent but no resources. Someone gave me an opportunity that changed my life. I believe in passing that forward." She paused. "Also, I saw how Victor Hargrove treated you last night. He meant to humiliate you for his amusement. I would like to see his face when you play Chopin on that piano of his someday." Eliza couldn't help but smile at the image. "I accept your offer." "Thank you. Excellent. Lee will arrange everything. You'll start next week." Mrs. Chen rose to leave, then added, "Oh, and I spoke with Victor last night about your schedule. You'll continue working at his house, but only 3 days a week instead of 5. The foundation stipend will make up the difference in your income." "You spoke to Mr. Hargrove about me?" Eliza asked, stunned. Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled. "We had a very interesting conversation about recognizing talent in unexpected places. I believe he's reconsidering some of his assumptions." She moved toward the door. "Music changes people, Eliza. Sometimes the ones playing it, sometimes the ones hearing it. Often both." After she left, Lee provided Eliza with a folder containing information about the scholarship program, a schedule of lessons, and access to practice rooms at the center. "This is the beginning of something significant. Ms. Martinez," he said as he walked her to the elevator, "Mrs. Chen doesn't make these offers lightly." As Eliza left the building and stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. Her life had changed course in less than 24 hours, all because Victor Hargrove had tried to humiliate her and failed. She wondered what would happen when she returned to his house for work, now only 3 days a week instead of 5. Would he be angry about Mrs. Chen's intervention? Or had their conversation really changed something in the way he saw her? Only time would tell. But for now, Eliza had a new path opening before her, one filled with music, something she had thought was lost to her long ago. 6 months passed in a blur of cleaning cloths and piano keys. Eliza's life fell into a new rhythm. 3 days at Victor's mansion, 4 days dedicated to music. The Chen Foundation scholarship proved to be more generous than she had initially understood. Beyond lessons and practice space, it provided enough financial support that she could reduce her cleaning hours without worrying about her brother's tuition or her rent. Professor Lin, her instructor, was a stern but kind man in his 60s who had trained pianists for over 40 years. At their first lesson, he had watched her play the simple lullaby, then immediately launched into proper hand positioning and posture. "You have good instincts but bad habits," he had told her. "We must fix the foundation before building the house." The early weeks had been frustrating. Eliza's fingers, strong from years of cleaning, struggled with the delicate control required for piano. She practiced scales and exercises until her hands cramped, often falling asleep at night with her fingers still twitching through patterns. But her natural ear for music accelerated her progress. By the 3rd month, Professor Lin had moved her from basic exercises to simple classical pieces. By the 4th month, she was working on Chopin's Prelude in E minor, a piece whose mournful beauty had captivated her from the first time she heard it. "Your technical skills are developing nicely," Professor Lin told her after a particularly productive lesson. "But more importantly, you play with genuine emotion. That cannot be taught." Working at Victor's house had changed too. Her first day back after the party had been awkward. Victor had been in his home office when she arrived, and she had gone about her cleaning duties as usual, unsure if he would mention what had happened. It wasn't until she was dusting the living room, with the piano sitting like a silent witness to that night, that Victor had appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Powell tells me you'll only be working here 3 days a week now," he had said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. The Chen Foundation offered me a music scholarship. I'll be here Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays." Victor had nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the scholarship covers everything? Lessons, equipment?" "Yes, sir. It's very generous." He had walked further into the room, stopping near the piano but not looking at it. "Mrs. Chen is a formidable woman. When she decides something is worth her attention, she commits fully." Eliza had continued dusting, unsure how to respond. "She seems to think you have exceptional talent," Victor had continued. "I'm not sure about that," Eliza had replied honestly, "but I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn." Victor had finally looked directly at her then. "I misjudged you that night. It was inappropriate of me to put you in that position." The closest thing to an apology she was likely to get from Victor Hargrove. "It worked out for the best," Eliza had said simply. He had nodded once, then left the room. After that day, something had shifted between them. Victor was still not exactly warm, but he began to acknowledge her presence more. Occasionally, he would ask brief questions about her lessons or progress. Now, 6 months after that fateful party, Eliza stood outside the Chen Music Center, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Tonight was her first recital, a small showcase of foundation students performing for friends, family, and donors. She would be playing 2 pieces, Bach's Prelude in C major and Chopin's Prelude in E minor. Her brother Matteo and his son Antonio waited for her in the lobby. Matteo had taken the night off from his job at the hospital kitchen to attend, and 8-year-old Antonio was fidgeting in his small suit. "You're going to be amazing," Matteo told her, giving her a quick hug. "I'm just nervous about messing up in front of everyone," she admitted. "You never mess up when you practice at our place," Antonio said loyally. "Even when our neighbor bangs on the wall because it's too late?" Eliza smiled at her nephew. The foundation had provided her with a digital piano for home practice, one she could play with headphones so as not to disturb their neighbors in the thin-walled apartment building. But occasionally she would play without the headphones, letting the music fill their small living space. Ms. Martinez, Li Wang approached them, elegant in a dark suit. Your teacher says you're more than ready. The auditorium is filling up nicely. Is Mrs. Chen here? Eliza asked. In the front row as always. She never misses a student showcase. Li hesitated, then added, and you have another unexpected guest. Mr. Hargrove arrived about 15 minutes ago. Eliza's eyes widened. Victor is here? Mrs. Chen invited him, apparently. Something about witnessing the results of their conversation. Li checked his watch. You should head backstage now. You'll be performing fourth in the program. After introducing her brother and nephew to Li, Eliza made her way backstage. Her heart was beating even faster now, knowing Victor was in the audience. The last 6 months had shown her that music was much more than a skill to be learned. It had become a form of expression, a voice she never knew she had. And tonight Victor would hear that voice. The small auditorium was designed for intimate performances, seating only about 200 people. From behind the curtain, Eliza could see the first few rows. Mrs. Chen sat regally in the center of the front row. 3 seats away, Victor Hargrove sat stiffly in a dark suit, looking slightly uncomfortable but attentive. The recital began with a young violin prodigy playing a piece by Mozart. Next came an elderly man who had started learning cello in his 70s, followed by a teenage girl playing a hauntingly beautiful flute solo. Then it was Eliza's turn. As she walked onto the stage in the simple black dress the foundation had provided, the spotlight momentarily blinded her. She couldn't see the audience as she took her seat at the bench, which was probably for the best. She focused on the keys before her, took a deep breath, and began. The Bach piece came first, structured, precise, mathematical in its beauty. She played it cleanly, her fingers finding each note with the certainty that came from hundreds of hours of practice. When the final notes faded, there was warm applause and Eliza allowed herself a small smile. But it was the Chopin that truly mattered to her. As she began the melancholy opening notes, she thought of her mother, of evenings spent singing together in their tiny kitchen, of hands that had worked hard all day still finding the energy to guide small fingers on keyboard keys. The piece spoke of both sadness and hope, of beauty found in dark places. Eliza poured everything she had learned, everything she had felt, into those few minutes of music. Her fingers moved with confidence now, finding emotional depths in the piece that she hadn't been able to access even a week earlier. When the final chord resolved, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began, stronger this time with a few calls of, "Bravo." As she stood to bow, the spotlight dimmed enough that she could see the audience. Mrs. Chen was nodding approvingly. Her brother and nephew were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. And Victor Hargrove was sitting completely still, a strange expression on his face that Eliza couldn't quite interpret. After the recital ended with a group bow from all performers, there was a small reception in the lobby. Eliza was immediately surrounded by her brother, nephew, and several other students she had befriended over the months. "That was beautiful, sis," Mateo said, hugging her tightly. Professor Lin approached, offering rare praise. "Your Bach was technically correct. Your Chopin was technically correct and emotionally authentic. Good progress." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. As the crowd thinned, Eliza spotted Victor standing awkwardly near the refreshment table, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. She excused herself from her group and approached him. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It was unexpected." "Mrs. Chen can be very persuasive," he replied. After a pause, he added, "You played well." "I'm still learning," Eliza said modestly. Nevertheless, Victor seemed to be struggling with what to say next. "The piano at the house. It's not being used. It seems wasteful." Eliza waited, unsure where he was going with this. "Mrs. Powell mentioned you practice on a digital piano at home. It's not the same as a real instrument." He took a sip of his water. "You're welcome to use the Steinway. When you're not working, I mean, for practice." The offer caught Eliza by surprise. "That's very generous." "It's practical," Victor corrected quickly. "The piano should be played. Otherwise, it's just expensive furniture." Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Chen joined them, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she looked between them. "Ah, Victor, what did you think of our investment?" she asked. "Impressive progress in 6 months. he acknowledged. Mrs. Chen turned to Eliza. You played with genuine heart tonight. In another year, you'll be ready for a proper public recital. She patted Eliza's hand. And I think Victor has something else to discuss with you. With that cryptic comment, she glided away to speak with other students. Victor cleared his throat. Yes, well, there's another matter. The Chen Foundation is hosting a benefit gala next month at my house. Mrs. Chen suggested you might perform. A short piece appropriate for the occasion. Eliza's eyes widened. At your house? For all your guests? If you're comfortable with the idea, Victor said. Was that uncertainty in his voice? You would be compensated, of course. As a professional pianist, not as household staff. The significance of the distinction wasn't lost on Eliza. 6 months ago, she had been the help, being humiliated for his amusement. Now he was offering to hire her as a musician. I'd be honored, she said, but I'd need to practice on the actual piano I'd be performing on. Instruments have their own personalities. Of course, Victor nodded. As I said, you're welcome to use it any time. Mrs. Powell can let you in when I'm not home. Later that evening, as Eliza and her family shared a celebratory late dinner at their favorite diner, she thought about how drastically her life had changed because of one cruel impulse that had backfired. You looked so confident up there, Mateo said, interrupting her thoughts. Like you belonged. I'm starting to feel that way, Eliza admitted. Like maybe music isn't just something I'm learning, but something I was always meant to do. 6 days later, Eliza stood in Victor's empty living room, facing the grand piano. She had come specifically to practice, not to clean. Mrs. Powell had let her in with a knowing smile before leaving for a doctor's appointment. Take all the time you need, dear, she had said. It's about time that beautiful instrument got the attention it deserves. Alone in the vast room where her journey had begun, Eliza sat at the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play, not Bach or Chopin this time, but the simple lullaby her mother had taught her years ago. The same melody that had changed the course of her life on a night when someone had tried to humiliate her, but had instead set her free. As the sweet, simple notes filled the room, Eliza didn't notice Victor standing in the doorway, listening silently, his face softened by something that might have been regret or respect or perhaps a bit of both.